Heavenly Sword was actually more important than you think. It was kind of a forgotten game, but back on the 7th gen of consoles, it was a true showcase of the power of the PS3. It had heavy use of motion capture, which was used before, but this time it had the help of Andy Serkis, who obviously played Gollum and did the motion capture for him in the Lord of the Rings film. So you literally had the biggest name in motion capture working on the game.
Dear me, such a heavy sword for such a fragile creature. Come, child, let me take your burden.
One year, my parents went on holidays to the States and they left the 3 of us with my nana back home. But then when my parents came back, obviously they felt bad for leaving us, so they brought us a couple of presents. And included in them presents was Burnout Paradise on the PS3, which to this day is still one of the best arcade racers ever made. And I'll never forget launching that game up, hearing Paradise City, and just falling in love with it. But also in the bundle alongside, I think, Devil May Cry 4 was Heavenly Sword. And this was definitely the most forgotten out of the bundle of games that we got. If I recall correctly, me and my brother did play this. And just like most games, by me and my brother playing it, I sat and I watched them. And I don't really remember much about this game. I think I remember the motion capture being good, but apart from that, I remember almost nothing about it. So with Hellblade 2, which is Ninja Theory's newest game coming out in just under a week, I wanted to go back and look at what this studio used to do, because Heavenly Sword really does seem like a precursor to Hellblade in that it's a character action game that focuses on really high production values. And from what I've played from Hellblade, the gameplay is actually the weakest part of it, the narrative is the strongest, and in Heavenly Sword, the gameplay is the weakest, the story is even weaker, but the tech demo aspects of it, from the graphics to the motion capture to the different uses of the 6-axis controller, is what makes this game stand out for better or worse. And yes, I have to address the elephant in the room. This game is running on a CRT in the background. It's just the gimmick of the channel. I have to see what it looks like, and it honestly doesn't look too bad. Yes, this is a HD game, it's 720p, and it's pushing all of this fidelity, look at the high definition stuff. But this is just the gimmick of the channel. I have to see what it looks like on a CRT. I have the cable for the PlayStation 3. And it honestly looks pretty good. Now, I think the motion capture is the aspect of this game that Warren's probably the most talking about, because ultimately, this just is a tech demo of a game. Every single console generation has these games. You think of Rise, Son of Rome, a game I never played. It was on the Xbox One, and honestly, it seems like it had a similar reception to this game. Same with The Order 1886, which is a game that I actually love, where they're so focused in on giving you all of these crazy new features like motion capture, and we'll give you all of these cinematics, or we'll do this, or blah, 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 and then they kind of forget to make a game. So I'll talk about the game in the second half. But Andy Serkis is involved in this game, and I thought maybe he only did the motion capture, but apparently he was actually quite heavily involved in creating the story and characters and stuff like that, which is really cool. But the story to this game is almost non-existent. Basically, there is the Heavenly Sword, which is this sort of sacred blade that the wielder has to pay the ultimate price. If you use it, you're gonna die. And in some prophecy, there was like this boy that was going to be born that would save the clan because he could wield the sword. But there was no boy born. Instead, there is Nariko, who is a warrior and the daughter of the leader of the clan. And you can hear that I'm not using specifics because I don't remember the characters, I don't remember the clan names, and I think that just epitomizes this story. Apart from the Heavenly Sword being this kind of cool blade that is sacred but also kills people when they use it, that's nothing new. But in the gameplay, it kind of is interesting because the Heavenly Sword can be augmented to be either a heavy weapon, a medium weapon, or a light weapon. So that's kind of cool. But apart from that, the story is completely uninteresting. The only part of the story that kind of captured me were the villains because of how over the top and crazy they are. This is obviously going for almost a realistic sort of perspective, and everything is almost kind of gritty and stuff like that. But then you get these villains. You get Andy Serkis playing the main villain, who was just an absolutely evil bastard, he's just slimy and dirty, and he just captured, I think, almost that kind of Gollum part, but he's human. Like, every interaction with him, you can just see how evil he is. He hates his son, who is this almost monstrosity that looks like Sloth, and he just abuses him, and I kind of feel sorry for his son, which is interesting because he's trying to kill you.
Daddy, what have I told you about calling me that word?
It's bad enough seeing you blot out the sun each day without being reminded that you sprang from my youthful and exuberant loins.
And then when he interacts with Naruko, it's really like sexual, and there's some weird shots on his groin and stuff. And he's just slimy and unsettling, and I think the performance is really well done, and you can see that it's Andy Serkis. And even to this day, the facial animations are still really good. Like, this was released in 2007, and the facial animations, I probably won't go as far to say they're as good as some today, but they're still really good. And then you have the Flying Fox, who was Andy Serkis' right-hand man. And again, his whole performance is just completely over the top. He has these cool blades coming out of his back. And I honestly wonder how this game would have panned out if it was more something like No More Heroes, where you're pushing to kill these people rather than them just kind of being a part of the story, not the main focus of the story. But I think apart from these memorable bosses, there's nothing really else interesting about the story or the characters. And then talking about the gameplay, it's like, this is just the definition of like a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10 kind of game that's just totally fine. It works, it looks good, but there's nothing to it apart from that. It's a spectacle fighter where you have combos, and it's very similar to God of War. I think you can even see it in Naruko's design, where the kind of highlight of her character is the red hair, and when you look back at Kratos, the highlight of his character is the red strip going down his body. And even the Heavenly Sword, the ranged version of the attacks, are almost like the Blades of Chaos, where you have chains and you're throwing the blades around. So it's extremely, like, it's very inspired by God of War, which isn't a bad thing considering, you know, what God of War was to PlayStation back then. But as a spectacle fighter, again, it's leaning towards a more arcadey, almost easy stuff like the original God of Wars, and less DMC. But the problem is that it just gives you so many combos, so fast, and you just kind of get overwhelmed with all of the different button combinations. And then you get into the fact that you can change the Heavenly Sword to heavy, light, and ranged attacks, all using L1 and R1 and augmenting it. And then your brain is just like, I do not know what to do. And also the combat and bosses and sort of enemy design isn't lending itself towards wanting you to interact with the enemies in different ways. It's almost always going to be the same method of using the same 2 or 3 combos to kill them. And I think it goes back to this when I'm talking about spectacle fighters, is that only a week removed from beating it, I can't really remember a memorable encounter or an interesting boss fight in its mechanics. It's not like they gave me this, oh, here's a boss fight where you have to kill these ads and they're going to really affect you. Or here's this combat encounter where you have spikes on either side of the wall and you have this enemy that wants to push you towards the spike, so you really have to learn how to fight them. It's just like you get into these rooms and there's just enemies running at you, and to block, you just don't move, you just automatically block. To pull off aerial combos, you launch them up into the air and then you jump, and then the camera changes so you're kind of locked into it, so it's not free flowing, it cuts it up. So then the aerial combos don't really feel overly amazing. And considering that that's the majority of the game, I'm like, this is just a bit disappointing that it's just not a great game. And then you get into the parts where they realized, they were like, okay, they're probably sitting in the boardroom, they were sitting there like, oh my god, this game's actually only like 3 hours long. We can't charge full price for a 3 hour long game, even though back then games were a lot shorter. But, you know, 3 hours is quite egregious. So then they were like, quick, we need to come up with a new feature. What's this feature gonna be? Come on, quick, give me an idea. Maybe we do shooting sections. Just throwing this out here. You know, this magical 6-axis, this really light controller you can snap in half that has all this motion controls. Maybe we use that. We get this shooting section where you're either on a cannon or you have a crossbow and you're just gonna sit there and shoot people for 10 minutes. And you're gonna hold square and you're gonna control the arrow with your 6-axis so you can feel the arrow, and you're like, oh, this was such a tech demo. It was such a tech demo. And the funny thing is about using the motion controls, they tried to put the motion controls into controlling the arrows and the cannonballs that you're shooting, which kind of works, but in the ones where you have to be really precise, I'm like, no, that's not working. But then they tried to introduce it into the combat. And to be honest, I kind of forget exactly what it is. I believe it's how you do an aerial. I think you hold triangle and you wiggle the controller to launch them up into the air. And I was like, oh my god. And then I tried to do it and it never worked, literally never worked. Now, the PS3 controllers are very flimsy and they are old, so there's always a chance that maybe the motion sensor was kind of trapped inside the case and it's not working properly. But it did work pretty well for the arrows, but trying to launch people up into the air didn't work. Now, luckily and surprisingly, you can turn these off in the menus, which honestly baffled me. I was really expecting not to be able to do it, but you can turn off the motion controls. And once you turn off the motion controls and you're in the arrow sections, they are so easy and so boring, but so long. They just break up the pacing of the game. They ruin whatever pacing was going in the game, which I don't think was overly amazing. As I said, the combat is like the best part of it, but it really isn't that great. And then in between the combat sections, you get those shooting sections. And then you also get the cutscenes that are very well acted and performed, but the story just didn't really grip me whatsoever. I think there's like a prequel movie or comic or something like that that maybe fleshes out the story, but that's what it feels like this could have used. It felt like almost like Final Fantasy 15, where I was like, oh, these characters might be cool and this world might be cool, but you're not giving me enough for me to get invested in it. And also, I'm not going to watch a prequel movie or whatever or read a comic, because I believe that if you get a game, the story should be complete and you shouldn't need outside things to enjoy the game. Maybe you might need to play a prequel, or you might need to play a previous entry in the series to understand it. That's totally fine. But to sit here and say like Heavenly Sword, maybe someone might come back and say, oh well, if you read the prequel comic or whatever, I think it's a comic or it's an animated movie or something like that, then you will appreciate it, and maybe I will. But unfortunately, I've no interest in doing it because this game did not grip me whatsoever. Luckily, it was short. I think I beat it in like 6 hours. So without those shooting sections, I genuinely think this game would have been like 3 or 4 hours. And yeah, it's a glorified tech demo. Does it deserve a permanent place in my gaming collection? I think you know the answer. It's a no. I mean, I bought it for €5. So the thing is with this is trading it in or getting rid of it means nothing, because I'll get like €1 for it. So at that stage, I may as well just keep it, because it's like, oh, this is a cool showcase of early PS3 games or something like that. But yeah, it didn't really inspire anything in me. Now, I did play their later game, Enslaved Odyssey to the West, which is a game, and it's a much better game. Now, it doesn't run very well on the PS3, and this game doesn't run amazingly. It's like struggles to reach 30 FPS, but it's so inconsequential because the game doesn't really need you to pull off like precise parries or anything like that. There's a couple of boss fights where you have to parry, deflect stuff away from them, but it's not really too important. So it doesn't run very well. Enslaved Odyssey to the West doesn't run very well from my memory either, but it's a way better game. And maybe I will play that, because there's a lot of Ninja Theory games, and they do have a special sauce to them, where that's why the first Hellblade caught everyone's eye, because of how good it looked for an independent studio. It's kind of, I'd say, more AA straddling the line of AAA. Now they are a AAA developer, but back then they were maybe a AA developer straddling on it. So yeah, Heavenly Sword, it doesn't deserve a place in my collection, but will I keep it? I probably will, because I'll get absolutely nothing for it, so I may as well just keep it on the shelf. I will probably play Enslaved Odyssey to the West in the future, because I do actually really enjoy that game. You know, issues aside, it very kind of reminds me of almost like a precursor to The Last of Us, to be honest. And yeah, I really appreciate you watching. I would love to know what you think of Heavenly Sword, if you've played it before, if you are interested in it. I don't see why anybody would be interested in it if they just watch this video, but maybe seeing a game is so mediocre, it actually kind of piques your curiosity, because that definitely happens for me. I'm not going to lie. There's a load of games where I hear, oh yeah, it is like a 6 out of 10. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to play that, because why not? So yeah, let me know what you think of Heavenly Sword, and let me know what other games you want me to cover on this channel. I appreciate all the support on the videos, even though I'm recording 2 videos in bulk, so I only know the reception of 1 video. So the second video could be absolutely awful. I don't know, but I still appreciate everybody watching. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.